The bright studio lights reflected off the polished round table of American Perspectives, one of the most popular political talk shows on cable news. Jessica Tarlov, the program's co-host and a respected analyst with a PhD in political science, leaned forward with curiosity. Across from her sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing Texas's 30th district, composed and confident in a navy blue suit. What started as a typical discussion on policies quickly shifted when Tarlov glanced at her notes, then looked up with a warmer tone. "Congresswoman Crockett, before we get back into policy, I'd like to ask you something a little more personal," Tarlov said, her voice softening from her usual sharp, analytical style. "Your career path from practicing attorney to serving in Congress is remarkable. What first inspired you to study law?" It seemed like a simple enough question, yet the atmosphere in the studio changed instantly. Even a production assistant later admitted you could feel the energy shift from politics to something far more personal. Crockett paused thoughtfully, her usual confidence giving way to a brief moment of vulnerability before she smiled with genuine warmth. "You know, Jessica, no one in national media has ever actually asked me that," she replied. "And honestly, my reason isn't what most people might assume. What followed wasn't a polished political talking point about ambition or justice. Instead, Crockett revealed a heartfelt story about family hardships, moments of unfairness she had witnessed, and a promise she once made to someone who never lived long enough to see her fulfill it. When she finished, the studio fell silent. The panelists, who were used to spirited debates, sat completely still. Even the production crew had stopped moving. Jessica Tarlov, normally quick with her follow-ups, was at a rare loss for words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried genuine emotion. "That may be the most honest answer I've heard in 15 years of doing political interviews. What made the exchange powerful wasn't only the personal story, but the way it broke through political lines." Within hours, clips of Crockett's response went viral, shared millions of times across social media. Viewers from all sides of the political spectrum saw something rare, authentic, human truth in a space often dominated by rehearsed sound bites. If you want to hear the full story that connected people across divides and reminded Americans of our shared humanity, make sure you keep watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss these real, unscripted moments that define American Perspectives. The program had earned a reputation for thoughtful political debates in a time of increasingly polarized media. Airing every Sunday morning, it featured respected analysts and elected officials from across the aisle, with discussions that dug deeper than the usual cable news sound clips. Jessica Tarlov had joined as co-host 3 years earlier, bringing both her political strategist background and her academic expertise from the London School of Economics. Known for her center-left views, she had built trust with viewers for her fair, open-minded approach. Unlike many TV hosts, she aimed to understand her guests, not corner them. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was still relatively new to national politics, just 2 years into her role, but she had already gained attention for her sharp policy knowledge and clear communication style. Before winning her seat in Congress, she had built a strong career as a civil rights lawyer, working on voting rights, police accountability, and criminal justice reform. On screen, she appeared confident, articulate, and passionate, yet few knew the long, difficult road that had brought her there. Raised in St. Louis by hardworking, working-class parents, Crockett had grown up seeing inequality firsthand. Her father worked in city maintenance, and her mother was a hospital aide. They emphasized the importance of education, persistence, and standing up for what's right. Their sacrifices made it possible for Crockett to attend college and eventually become the first in her family to graduate with a degree. That morning's BROADCAST had begun with the expected subject's recent legislation, the upcoming elections, and policy debates. It was the kind of informed political conversation viewers tuned in for. As the show reached its midpoint, Tarlov guided the discussion toward criminal justice reform, an area where Crockett's legal background gave her strong credibility. "The data is clear," Crockett explained, citing research on racial and economic disparities in the legal system. This isn't about politics, it's about making sure the system works fairly for everyone. At that moment, Tarlov's expression shifted. Watching Crockett speak with conviction, she seemed to make a split-second decision to change direction. The personal question about law school wasn't part of the pre-show briefing. It came from a place of genuine curiosity, a quality that's increasingly rare in political television. Have you ever noticed how rarely we hear about the real motivations behind the careers of public figures? Too often, political reporting focuses only on policies, votes, and party lines, while the life experiences that shaped these leaders remain hidden. Share in the comments. What do you think we lose when politics is reduced to positions instead of personal stories? This is what made Jessica Tarlov's question so powerful. She asked it at a time when the nation felt more divided than ever, when many voters saw politicians only as representatives of their party instead of full human beings with personal histories. A recent Pew Research survey found that 64% of Americans couldn't name a single personal detail about their own members of Congress beyond party affiliation. The same study also revealed something striking. When voters did learn about a politician's background, their view of that politician's character and motives improved, even when they still disagreed on policies. That context made Tarlov's decision to ask Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett a personal question especially meaningful. Congresswoman Crockett, before we go back to policy, I'd like to ask something more personal, she said, her professional tone softening into something warmer. Your journey from attorney to Congress is remarkable. What first led you to study law? For a moment, the studio was silent. The cameras captured a subtle change in Crockett's expression, a flash of vulnerability before she regained her composure. Then she leaned back slightly, ready to open up. You know, Jessica, no one in national media has ever asked me that, she said with a small smile. And honestly, the answer isn't what most people might expect. She adjusted in her chair, as if preparing for a more intimate conversation. Most people assume I always wanted to be a lawyer, that I grew up watching courtroom dramas and imagining myself in trial scenes. But that wasn't my story at all. Instead of offering a polished, one-line response, Crockett began to share something raw and personal. When I was 14, my Uncle Marcus was arrested for a crime he didn't commit. He was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because our family couldn't afford a private lawyer, he was assigned a public defender who barely met with him for 20 minutes before the hearing. My uncle ended up spending 8 months in jail before the real culprit confessed. The studio grew noticeably quiet. Crockett continued. Those 8 months cost him everything: his job, his apartment, and nearly broke my grandmother, who spent her retirement savings trying to help him. And when he was finally released, I thought surely the system would apologize or compensate him. But no, nothing. It was as if those months of his life meant nothing at all. Her voice wavered for just a moment as she recalled sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table while her uncle tried to explain that this is just how things work sometimes. Crockett shook her head. I remember thinking that couldn't possibly be true, that there had to be rules against this kind of injustice. So that's when you decided to become a lawyer? Tarlov asked gently. Not right away, Crockett replied, smiling faintly. At first, I decided I would become president so I could just change all the unfair rules. The table chuckled softly at the light-hearted moment before she grew serious again. But as I got older, I realized the law wasn't only the problem, it could also be the solution, if it was applied the right way. She explained that her grandmother, who had cleaned office buildings at night for 3 decades to help put Crockett's father through school, was the one who first encouraged her to study law. She only had an 8th grade education, but she had an incredible understanding of how systems worked. She used to tell me, if you don't like the rules, you need to learn them first. Did she live to see you become an attorney? Tarlov asked quietly. Crockett's face darkened with emotion. No, she passed away during my 2nd year of college. Pancreatic cancer. It happened so fast. She took a deep breath before continuing. The night before she died, I promised her that I would keep going. That I would become the kind of lawyer who fought for people like my uncle, people who needed someone in their corner. When the system failed them, the story completely shifted the studio atmosphere. The other panelists, a conservative commentator, a business leader, and a former mayor, listened silently, forgetting political lines for a moment. Law school wasn't easy, Crockett added. I had to work jobs while studying and the debt piled up. There were times I almost quit. But I always came back to that promise and to something my grandmother used to say, justice without power is empty. But power without justice is just tyranny. That's Blaise Pascal, Jessica Tarlov noted. Recognizing the quote, yes, Crockett smiled. My grandmother didn't own many books, but she read the ones she had over and over. Pascal was her favorite. She used to tell me, you don't need a lot of books if you truly understand the ones you read. Crockett then reflected on how her early career as a lawyer shaped her view of the legal system. She described representing clients who, like her uncle, were trapped in a system that seemed built more for efficiency than fairness. I realized that while I could help one client at a time, the deeper problems were structural, she explained. Case by case wasn't enough. The system itself needed change, and that recognition is what ultimately pushed me toward politics. As she spoke, her story naturally expanded from personal experience to the broader lessons she carried into public service. She described how her work influenced her approach to criminal justice reform, voting rights, and economic opportunity. When I draft legislation, it's never just numbers on a page for me, she said. I'm thinking about real people. The single mother who couldn't reach the polls because of restricted voting hours. The young man whose small mistake became a lifelong barrier to employment. The elderly couple facing eviction because of predatory lenders. What made Crockett's response stand out wasn't only the emotion behind her words, but how she connected her personal journey to a wider vision of service. She wasn't sharing her past just to build credibility or stir emotions. She was showing how lived experience could shape thoughtful, grounded policymaking. The law degree was never the destination, she concluded. It was the tool. A way to keep my promise to my grandmother and to fight for the change my uncle and so many others like him deserve. When people ask why I'm so passionate about these issues, it's because they're not theories to me. They're as real as my grandmother's hands, scarred from decades of cleaning so that our family could have chances she never had. When Crockett finished, the studio went completely silent. For a moment, the usual rhythm of political television disappeared, replaced by something far more human. Jessica Tarlov, normally quick with analysis, was briefly speechless. When she did respond, her voice carried genuine emotion. That is perhaps the most honest answer I've heard in 15 years of political interviews. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer, one of those rare televised moments where scripted talking points gave way to authentic connection. It was conservative commentator Richard Mercer who finally broke the silence. Known for his sharp critiques of progressives, he leaned forward with unexpected sincerity. Congresswoman, I've disagreed with you on plenty of policies, he said, but I want to thank you for sharing that story. It helps me better understand where you're coming from, even if we still disagree. The cameras caught Crockett's surprise at this acknowledgement from a frequent opponent. Thank you, Richard, she replied. I think that's all any of us can ask, for our perspectives to be understood, even in disagreement. Sensing the significance of the moment, Tarlov carefully guided the conversation forward. Congresswoman, you mentioned the gap between the ideals you carried as a law student and the realities you faced in practice. How has that tension shaped the way you approach lawmaking? Her question opened the door to one of the most thoughtful discussions the program had ever hosted. Instead of retreating into partisan points, all four panelists engaged in a deep conversation about the balance between legal ideals and real-world governance. Crockett explained how her legal training gave her both strengths and blind spots in Congress. Law school teaches you to think in principles and precedents, she said. But governing is about people. Sometimes the legally correct answer isn't the most just answer once you look at the full human context. Sophia Shun, the business leader on the panel, built on Crockett's point. That resonates with me in the private sector as well. Policies that look perfect on paper often fail when implemented, because they don't consider how real people will react or the unintended effects that ripple through complex systems. What followed was a rare kind of political conversation, what some later described as politics at its best. Adults with different perspectives, engaging respectfully, acknowledging complexities, and searching for common ground without abandoning their values. As the segment drew toward its conclusion, Tarlov circled back to the personal thread that had changed the tone of the entire discussion. "Congresswoman Crockett," she asked, her voice steady but gentle, "given everything you've shared about your grandmother's influence, what do you think she would say if she could see your journey from that promise at her bedside to serving in the United States Congress?" Crockett's expression softened. "She wouldn't be impressed by the title or the office," Crockett said with a soft smile. "She'd want to know what I was actually doing with the position, whether I was keeping that promise in spirit, not just in words. She'd probably remind me of one of her favorite sayings, 'The measure of your success isn't how high you climb, but how many you bring with you.' That's a powerful standard for public service," Tarlov noted. "It's the only one that matters," Crockett replied. "When you take away the party labels and the political identities, it really comes down to one simple question. Are we using our positions, whatever they may be, to build a system that works better for everyone, especially for those left behind? That's the promise I made, and it's the standard I try to hold myself to, even when I fall short." As the segment wrapped up, viewers witnessed something rarely seen in political media, a moment where partisan walls faded, replaced by an honest conversation about shared values and different ways of pursuing them. The program went to a commercial break, but what happened off-camera was just as revealing. The panelists continued their conversation privately. A production assistant later noted that Mercer, the conservative commentator, and Crockett exchanged contact information. Mercer even expressed interest in finding areas where they might collaborate despite their political differences. By the time American Perspectives ended that day, the atmosphere in the studio had shifted. The usual distance between political opponents had softened into something more respectful and collegial, a reminder that behind the divides are human beings shaped by personal experiences, each trying in their own way to build a better society. What no one anticipated was how quickly Crockett's story would resonate outside the studio. By Sunday evening, clips of the exchange were spreading rapidly across social media. What made the moment remarkable wasn't just the speed of the sharing, it was that people across the political spectrum were posting it. Conservative and progressive accounts alike captioned the clip with messages such as, "This is what authentic leadership looks like, and this is when politics feels real." Watch this. By Monday morning, the exchange had reached mainstream headlines. News programs across networks aired the clip, with analysts pointing out how unusual it was in today's media environment. "What we saw wasn't a Democratic congresswoman scoring points," one commentator observed. "It was a person opening up about the experiences that shaped her service. We need more of this." By Tuesday, the clip had surpassed 18 million views across platforms. It wasn't only circulating in political spaces, it was being shown in classrooms, business workshops, and community leadership groups. The story had transcended politics, sparking conversations about purpose, keeping promises, and turning hardship into action. What stood out most was the way Crockett's message cut across divides. Older viewers admired the values of family duty and honoring commitments. Younger audiences connected with the authenticity and sense of purpose. Conservatives related to the themes of family values and responsibility, while progressives appreciated the focus on justice and reform. Later that week, Jessica Tarlov reflected on the moment in a morning news interview. "In today's media environment, we rarely give leaders space to share the real experiences that shape them," she explained. "We press for positions, but not the journeys behind those positions." What Congresswoman Crockett shared was a reminder that behind every policy disagreement is a human story and understandable motivations. Even if we differ on the solutions, the ripple effects went beyond the media cycle. Several law schools began incorporating the clip into orientation sessions, using it to spark discussions on how personal experience shapes professional purpose. Leadership programs across industries added it to their curriculum as an example of authentic storytelling and purpose-driven leadership, perhaps most notably. The exchange inspired a wave of similar moments on other political shows. Hosts began asking more questions about formative experiences and personal motivations, allowing guests to connect their policy stances to their real-life backgrounds. These segments consistently drew higher engagement than standard political debates, proving that audiences craved more humanized political dialogue. 2 weeks later, American Perspectives invited Congresswoman Crockett back for a longer discussion on her journey from law to politics. This time, she was joined by 2 other members of Congress from different parties. Each shared personal experiences that had influenced their service. Despite representing different political ideologies, they discovered surprising areas of common ground in their motivations, even as their approaches to solutions remained distinct. One particularly moving moment came when Congressman James Wilson, a Republican from Ohio, described how his brother's struggle with addiction had shaped his views on criminal justice. Though Congresswoman Crockett and I often cast different votes on these issues, he admitted, I understand the heart behind her perspective. I recognize that we're both trying to fix broken systems that harm real people, Crockett said. We just approach the problems differently because of the experiences that shaped us. This simple but powerful point inspired American Perspectives to launch a recurring segment called Paths to Service, where leaders from across the political spectrum share the life experiences behind their public service. The format quickly became the show's most popular feature, drawing high ratings and sparking unusually constructive conversations online. 1 month after her first appearance, Congresswoman Crockett returned to her alma mater to deliver the commencement address. Instead of a typical political speech, she expanded on the themes she had shared on television, urging graduates to draw from their own lives as they pursued their goals. Your greatest contribution won't come from copying someone else's vision, she told them. It will come from the unique perspective your life has given you, especially the hard parts. The obstacles you've faced, the injustices you've witnessed, and the promises you've made, those aren't distractions from your journey. They are the foundation of the contribution only you can make, she ended with a tribute to her grandmother's wisdom. Success isn't measured by the heights you reach, but by how many you bring with you. Whatever path you choose, let it honor not just your ambitions, but your obligations to those who helped you and to those who may never have the opportunities you now have. The speech went viral, further strengthening Crockett's reputation as a voice for authentic leadership that rises above partisanship. National publications ran features with headlines such as From Courtroom to Congress, How Legal Training Shapes Political Perspective and Promise-Keeping as Political Philosophy. The Crockett Approach. 6 months after the original broadcast, Jessica Tarlov and American Perspectives received the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Political Journalism. The judges praised the program for creating space for authentic dialogue that humanizes political leaders and helps audiences understand the experiences, shaping different viewpoints. In her acceptance speech, Tarlov reflected, "We've learned that viewers aren't tired of politics, they're tired of performative politics. When we make space for real conversations about the experiences and values behind our differences, people stay engaged. They may not change their policy views, but they gain something even more important, the ability to see opponents as human beings with understandable motivations." The biggest legacy of the Crockett-Tarlov exchange wasn't a single policy change, but a shift in expectations for political discourse. Audiences and voters began to demand the kind of authentic engagement modeled in that conversation. Political leaders in turn felt pressure to connect their policies to their lived experiences rather than hiding behind talking points. As one analyst put it, the Crockett-Tarlov exchange reminded us that behind every policy stance is a person shaped by real experiences. Understanding those stories doesn't erase disagreements, but it makes us less likely to question each other's humanity or good faith. And that's the foundation democracy depends on. For Congresswoman Crockett, the viral moment reinforced the very approach to public service she had described. She continued tying her policy advocacy to personal stories, showing how systemic issues affect people in her district and beyond. While she remained firm in her progressive principles, She built relationships with colleagues across the aisle by focusing on shared values. Even when their solutions differed. 1 year later, a national survey revealed the impact of this new approach. 72% of Americans wanted more political coverage focused on the life experiences of public servants. 68% said they were more likely to listen to opposing viewpoints when they understood the personal stories behind them. This shift didn't erase political disagreements, nor should it in a healthy democracy, but it helped restore something vital: recognition of shared humanity across divides. It reminded people that most who enter public service, regardless of ideology, are striving imperfectly but sincerely to create a better society based on the lessons of their own lives. As Jessica Tarlov later reflected, the most powerful thing about Congresswoman Crockett's story wasn't the specific details, it was how it reminded us that politics, at its best, isn't about abstract ideology. It's about people trying to fix the real problems they've witnessed and lived through. When we reconnect politics to those human foundations, we create space for the kind of disagreement democracy actually needs to function. If you found this kind of authentic exchange refreshing in today's political climate, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more moments that break through partisanship and reveal the real experiences shaping our public discourse, and we'd love to hear from you. What personal experiences have shaped your own views on public policy? Share your story in the comments below.